my teenage years were a mess. My mom and dad went through a bad divorce, leaving me somewhere in between as I adjusted to an irregular schedule and a sudden move. In my last year of high school, just 6 months from graduation, we moved all the way to San Antonio. It was quite a different vibe from a no-one-cares kind of town in Minnesota. I graduated at the turn of the millennium, class of 2000. I rarely think about that year in Tom Skog High. I remember the high school, the weird pool, the crude nicknames, Handsome Man, Melonhead, and the Babin siblings being creeps. I remember Hank, whose dad was a plumber, collecting bizarre things like pop tabs and bottle caps in meticulously sorted jars. He was the only one I guess I could call a friend. Nowadays, I live out in Kerrville. I have a wife, 2 kids, 2 cars, and a very pampered golden retriever named Kitten. In this kind of life, you don't need to think back on your teenage years. You're busy worrying about college tuition and why your favorite shirt is starting to feel too tight. So, when a couple of strangers came knock on my door on a Sunday, I didn't think much of it. A white van with a generic logo, a wrench, a cogwheel, and a couple of pipes, was parked outside. 2 men in orange coveralls and full tool belts stood at my door. They introduced themselves with a company name I didn't recognize. The city has taken steps to minimize damage from flash flooding, one explained. We're doing some groundwork looking at possible run-throughs. Since you live at the end of the block, chances are we're going to have to go all around your property. So what are we looking at? I asked. Maybe 3 months of road work as stones tossed away from your bedroom window, he continued. Unless we can work something out and go straight through your backyard, then we're looking at a month tops. Well, I think I'd be entitled to some compensation then, and I would have to talk to my wife about it. Of course, yeah, he nodded. Come along. I'll show you what we're working with. I stepped out of the house looking back at Kitten. He wasn't happy about it, tail between his legs and all. I closed the door and followed the men to the van. The moment they opened the side door, I was confused. There were no pipes, no tools, nothing. It was a blacked-out storage unit with soundproofed walls. One of them pulled a hood over my head. The other tossed me. It felt like they had tied all my nerves to a single spot and were trying to rip them out of my skin. It was so fast. Just a couple of seconds, and then I was face down in the back of a van with my legs and hands zip-tied. The van sped off. A couple of streets later, they stopped. They did something to the side of the van, presumably changing the license plate. Meanwhile, the guy in the back wrapped me up in some kind of plastic. The best thing you can do is be quiet and still, he explained. Are we going to have a problem? I finally managed to get a question out. What do you want? I'll be honest, he said. I have no idea. We drove for a couple of hours. They sat me up and chained me to the wall. They treated me like I was dangerous. They would shy away from me whenever I moved. They hadn't even checked my wallet for cash. They just took my cell phone. I finally managed to piece together a question. But what if we got it wrong? You saw what it took to dredge that melon head out of the lake. That tickled something in my brain. I hadn't heard that nickname in years. Melonhead, the guy who used to stay in the gym a lot, the cruel mockery. That's when it first hit me. They were talking about my class that 1 year back in Minnesota. I was only there for a couple of months, I said out loud. We had to move. The guy in the back stepped closer. So, you never got the shots? Nothing. What are you talking about? I could hear hesitation in his voice. Someone had messed up somewhere down the line. The 2 of them stepped away. Look, the driver said, we can either be the ones who took some initiative and disobeyed a direct order, or we can do what we're told. So, we're going to stick them in the pods with those things. Mistake or not, they weren't about to turn back. They drove all night. By morning, we had pulled up to an industrial complex. I could hear the machinery and power tools going off as metal struck metal. There were people there too. Dozens of them. I was led into a quieter room in the back and asked to step inside what felt like a locker. Rubber floor and walls, barely big enough for my shoulders to fit. They strapped me in, allowing me to effectively sit in there. Then they tipped the entire thing, making me feel like I was lying in a coffin. It was completely soundproof and dark. A voice came from an internal speaker. We're releasing the straps in a moment. Then you can take off your hood. It's going to be a long ride. Try to get some sleep. How long? I asked. Where are we going? There was no answer. The straps came undone with a click and I threw off my hood. It was pitch black. I lost all sense of time in there. It might have been a couple of hours. It could have been a whole day. I had 2 more meals, so I'm thinking that it all took about a day. I know there was a flight involved, though, because my ears popped. I was half asleep the next time they used the speaker. We'll be opening the doors in 10 seconds. Make no sudden movements. I was only at 5 when the door popped open. Two masked men with assault rifles. A man in a white lab coat with a protective face mask. A white room with blinding fluorescent lights. They made me turn away and put restraints on as I was dragged to a chair and made to sit down. I felt so weak, like I had been pulled out of bed at 3 o'clock in the morning. The man in the lab coat got down on one knee to face me. Where did you graduate? Southwest San Antonio, right? Right. Where were you before that? I explained the circumstances. My time in Tomskog High, Minnesota. A couple of years in West Virginia. Before that, South Dakota. Checks out, he said as I finished, looking at a clipboard. You were never part of the class long enough to get any booster shots or heat therapy. No, nothing like that. So when you hear names like Digman, Babin, Bowen, that means nothing to you? It rings a bell, I shrugged. But not much else. The doctor sighed, giving the others a long look. And put him in a room, the doctor said. He's not part of the subject line, all sorted out. And go ahead and tell Ridge to prep for extraction. Sir, the man's a veterinarian. What are we going to use him for? The doctor snapped back. You that desperate to get your cat's teeth cleaned? No, sir. Put him in the room. I was escorted to a small, brightly lit room. Sleek interior, a queen-sized bed, a couch, a bedside table with a water pitcher and a glass, a mini fridge with snacks and sodas. Honestly, I had slept in worse places. I took some time to decompress. I was still a prisoner, but at least they were hearing me out. I figured there had been a mistake, but I couldn't figure out exactly what. Maybe someone in that class had done something terrible and everyone they had been involved with was under scrutiny. But if so, why wait this long? I managed to get the TV going and was halfway through a Bill Murray comedy when the door opened. A woman in a gray pantsuit was escorted inside by an armed guard. I was forced up against the wall on the opposite side of the room. They checked my pockets for weapons and had me sit on the bed. As he finished, the woman turned to him. We got it from here, she said. You can wait outside. She sat down on the couch across from me. I just think we ought to have a conversation. I don't want to interrupt your me time. I can talk, I assured her. Talk away. You mind telling me why I'm here, what you think you're doing? She gave me a long look, tilting her head. I want you to consider something, she said. Think about where you are, about who you might be talking to. Consider the lengths we've gone to in order to get you here into this room. Now ask yourself this. Is asking me a question like that beneficial to your current situation? I shook my head, staying quiet. I would agree, she continued. So maybe we should stick to me asking the questions. She went through a list of checkpoints, asking about my mental and physical health. She asked me about people that I spent a lot of time with, about my children and spouse. It's as if they were looking to see if anything stood out. She couldn't find anything. Well, she sighed, putting away her notepad. It appears you weren't supposed to be on that list. I suppose an apology would be in order. She opened a shoulder bag, producing a set of papers and a pen. This has been an unfortunate misunderstanding, and we will be sure to rectify it. I think we can come to terms. I was given a contract with a firm called Hatchet Pharmaceuticals. This contract confirmed that I had been consulting them on an important project. They spelled out a point list of items to be compensated for, like food, hotel rooms, overtime pay, all the bells and whistles. All in all, it was more than fair compensation. Just over 6 figures. A solid cover story. We're very thorough, she said. We can assign a representative to explain the situation to your family. I think that'd be for the best. And after this we're done, I confirmed. And we walk away. Correct. Correct. I'll have you on a flight first thing in the morning. I signed the contract. I hope you see why we can't let you roam the facility. You'll have to stay the night, but we'll do our best to accommodate you. That's fine. Just an early flight. She got up, leaving a copy of the contract. As she left the room, I noticed the armed guard still waiting outside. She turned to me a final time. I'll get you a root beer. I know you like them. For a couple of hours, I was comfortable. They got me a proper steak dinner and a root beer, and I ended up watching movies until I fell asleep. The lighting was pretty impressive. It started to dim on its own once it noticed me getting into bed. I must have slept for about 2 hours when I noticed something. The buzz of the ceiling fan stopped, and the dimmed lights were completely black. I waved my arm a little to see if there was a sensor, but nothing happened. I got up to check the door. It must have had some kind of magnetic lock because I still couldn't open it. And then I heard this thumping noise, and I just had this feeling like it's one thing to hear footsteps, but this sounded wrong. I stepped aside and pressed myself up against the wall, facing away from the door. Seconds later, something stopped outside my room, and I hear this metallic groan. The door was bent open inch by inch. The mechanism snapped and bent from immense pressure. Something was standing in the doorway. I heard this low rumble like a snoring bull and then a crack followed by a loud chewing like somebody eating a fresh carrot. More. The voice was more of a gargle. It sounded like it came from the chest of something rather than the mouth. I could smell the sharp tang of iron in the air as there was another snap. The intruder was dragging something along the ground, taking the occasional bite. Snap, chew, snap, chew, more. The lights in the hall were still out, so even though the door was open, I couldn't see a thing. I held my breath and ducked down low as a large hand swept by just to my right. It was looking for the dimmer switch. When I realized it wasn't working, it snorted and left the room, lumbering off down the hallway, dragging a snack along. I used my hands to feel my way out of the door. It was bent in the middle and barely clinging to its hinges. The lock mechanism was still there, but it was so busted that you could pull it out with your bare fingers. A low hum. Some kind of backup generator came on, bathing the hallway in a red light. My eyes adjusted as I realized I was standing in a liquid that covered most of the hallway. It might have been red. It was impossible to tell, but given how it smelled, I'm pretty sure that I was standing in a pool of blood. There were torn pieces of armor splattered on the walls along with patches of skin clinging to the fabric. I had never seen anything like it. It's one thing to see a strange man with a knife. That is scary, but to see a pile of corpses out in the open? That's almost too scary. I tried to backtrack through the hallways. There were these pipes on the walls in different colors and symbols, but I couldn't make sense of them. I figured if I went the opposite way of the arrows, that should bring me back to the origin point or maybe even the exit. What had happened in my corridor was no isolated incident. There were signs of struggles all over. I saw a man covered head to toe in some kind of black acid, melting him into bone. There were several patrols of people with white masks speaking to each other like grunting cavemen. I stopped counting dead bodies after 20. I heard voices up ahead. I stopped myself. From what I had seen so far, things weren't that simple. I stayed by the corner listening. Door locked. A second voice. Yes, locked. A third person joined the conversation, wandering in from an adjoining corridor. You masked faces happy just standing here. A man's voice. He had a strange intonation like he couldn't help but to roll his R's and end his sentences in a gulping noise. It reminded me of one of the kids that I went to high school with, Roy. He had this speech impediment like a stutter. He would stop it by swallowing hard and shaking his head like a tick. It was such a specific noise that it was hard to pinpoint with a description, but that's where it hit me. Roy Melonhead. These were old Minnesota classmates. They had brought me in on suspicion of being part of this class. If that was the case, what did that mean? Was all this chaos perpetrated by my old classmates? So, what the hell happened to them? Making my way to the main corridor, I ran across more gruesome sights. There was a man covered head to toe in some kind of black acid, melting him into bone. I eventually got to a lobby of sorts. 2 massive storm doors had gone down, blocking the exit. There had been a massacre, at least 8, maybe 10 people all crushed against the door. I heard someone approaching and escaped into a side room. It was a lunchroom. I hurried inside and pressed myself up against the wall. It didn't take me long to realize that I wasn't alone. Someone was hiding behind the couch. You need to leave, a voice whispered. I have a gun. I shook my head and put a finger on my lips to shush them. I could hear someone approaching from outside. You need to leave right now, they insisted. I'm not asking. This is my spot. I shook my head again. If they fired a weapon, this place would be crawling with things in a matter of seconds. They would doom us both. The door creaked a little. I could see the shadow of 2 long legs as something bent down to enter. It's impossible to describe the scale of this thing. It was at least 10, maybe 11 feet tall, like an elongated person. A slick black, jelly-like skin rippling with chunks. As it moved, I could spot patches of white poking out at different angles. Bones, like someone had deconstructed a person and jammed it into a walking puddle. There was hesitation. Whoever was hiding in there with me decided to shut the hell up. A long arm reached out, touching the side of the drink machine. It was such a casual movement, but it was forceful enough to knock the whole thing onto the floor with a bang. A couple of cans rattled out of it. The tall thing pulled on a pop tab, seemingly frustrated. I could hear something in the distance like a roar getting louder and louder, and then a series of mechanical clicking and a spark. The lights were coming back on. The red gave way to harsh fluorescent light as I saw this thing in full and clear view. It was barely keeping itself together. It was like if someone was trying to hold old Jell-O with a 2-pronged fork. It was looking at the person hiding on the couch. It only took me a brief glance to realize it was the woman in the gray pants suit that had talked to me earlier. As the thing saw her, she pulled out her gun. I covered my ears and sunk to the floor. There was gunfire and screaming. The creature had a hand big enough to cover her face and used it to push the back of her head into the ground. It must have had some kind of suction force to it as the body stuck to it. The screams came and went in a flash. Just a quick snap and then nothing. By the time I looked up, the thing was already looking at more interesting items around the room. It seemed very curious about the soda cans. It pulled off a pop tab. "This?" I asked. "You want this?" An oil-slick hand reached for it, accidentally grazing my finger. The skin on my index finger turned a sickly orange as my nail darkened. I could feel the deep ache as if my nerve was hardening. My finger curled in on itself as it picked up the pop tab. I pointed at a nearby table. "There are cups," I said. "You can put it in a cup, collect them, put them all together again, all the same, just like you want it to." The thing turned its head. At least I think it did. "Hank?" I called out. "It's Hank, right?" The hand slowed, dropping to the floor. The ceramic tiles turned a sickly blue, fizzling. I could see something just beneath the surface of the sludge. A cranium. There really was some kind of head under there, and it was looking my way. "You collect things. You arrange them in jars. Are you collecting now?" It bobbed its head. "Hey, if we go outside you can collect so many more things," I said. But then we got to open the door. It bobbed its head again and stepped back, leaving room for me to leave. I bent the hand of the lady in gray open, the corpse the sludge thing was carrying, revealing a key card. I pulled it loose only for the sludge thing to turn my way. It did not appreciate this intrusion. With one step it closed the distance. I had to do something or I'd be next. "Hank?" I called out again. "It's Hank, right?" The hand slowed, dropping to the floor. The ceramic tiles turned a sickly blue, fizzling. I could see something just beneath the surface of the sludge. A cranium. There really was some kind of head under there, and it was looking my way. "You collect things. You arrange them in jars. Are you collecting now?" It bobbed its head. "Hey, if we go outside you can collect so many more things," I said. But then we got to open the door. It bobbed its head again and stepped back, leaving room for me to leave. I did. The main lobby was filled with various things. People in masks, something large chewing on an arm. I think I saw the Babin siblings in there, but I can't say for sure. The large thing in the back stepped forward the moment that it saw me, pointing with its whole arm. There was no doubt in my mind that I knew this person. Melonhead. His facial features looked a bit exaggerated from when I had last seen him, and he was a whole lot taller, but it was him. I barely recognized him as human now, having an almost grayish skin and dark eyes. I could see him salivating as he dropped a bloodless limb to the floor, advancing towards me in a jog. The sludge thing, Hank, came up from behind, swinging an arm in a wide arc. It smacked Melonhead, sending him railing back, scratching at his face. Hank was making sure that I made it to the door. I hurried up to a control panel on the wall, swiping the key card. Step 1, authorization complete. Please present your hand for biometric confirmation. I swallowed hard as Hank dropped an acid-burned arm next to me. It was surprisingly heavy. I held it up to the panel, manually adjusting the fingers. My stomach churned. It felt like playing with raw chicken. "Please hold," the system asked as a taskbar reached 100%. Then green lights. The storm door started rolling. Some of them ran. Some of them screamed with joy. A couple didn't say a thing. A couple people with white masks kept guns at the ready. Melonhead lumbered outside looking for his next snack. And finally, Hank. He put the coffee cup down, realizing that there wouldn't be any more pop tabs around for a while. He wandered off without looking back, stretching out to the point where he rivaled the treetops. By the time the lobby was empty, I stepped outside. Some of them had run into the woods. A couple of them had moved down a path towards the barracks. There was a pine forest ahead, so I guessed I was somewhere in the Midwest or up north. "Not much of a reunion, buddy." That strange voice again with the rolling R's, the gulping. I didn't need to turn around to know that I was talking to one of the Babin siblings. I turned to face him, a pale man with slick hair combed back, a hawk-like nose, and these chemically wide eyes. He leaned against the open storm door in a parody of casualness. "I recognize you, you know," he continued. "Class of 2000. Tom Skog High." I did. "San Antonio." "Oh, too bad. We had a lot of fun after graduation." He grinned. "I really don't think you can." He gave me a pat on the shoulder as he passed me by, trying to catch up to his sister. I managed to get to a highway. From there, I got in touch with the police, which led to a series of phone calls, a booked plane, and a tearful reunion with my family. I had to go through surgery to get my index finger fixed. The acid burn from Hank's touch was bad, and they described the damage as my nerve trying to pull into itself. I had to walk around with a cast for weeks. I stuck to the story as well as I could. I was kidnapped due to mistaken identity. I did get a check in the mail not long after, printed on cheap paper with a stamped blue sunflower logo. It came with a notice that I would only be getting one payment. They were shutting down that branch of the organization for an emergency restructuring. I guess Hatchet Pharmaceuticals is getting shuttered. I couldn't care less. I got paid and I got out. The physical trauma faded, but the psychological remnants remained. It wasn't what I saw that haunts me the most. It's what I felt. A pulse beating out of my chest, not knowing if the next beat will be my last. Stepping around the corner, praying that no one heard me struggling to breathe. That feeling comes back every now and then. I can be standing in my bedroom looking at the door and I just get this sense that there's someone waiting on the other side. I have not been contacted about the class of 2000 since. There have been no emails and no texts and no strange visits. No white vans pulling up in my driveway telling me lies. And I don't know if that's a good thing. Something tells me it isn't. But my curiosity gnawed at me. I began researching the true nature of the place they took me and the strange transformation of my former classmates. The facility was never officially listed. My payment check was traced back to a small, private foundation that dissolved the day the check cleared. My only lead was the name of the high school and the specific, bizarre nature of the transformations. I realized the common element wasn't the class, it was the location and the school itself. I started researching Tomskog, Minnesota. I found a collection of obscure local articles mentioning strange incidents tied to the high school. Not cults or anything dramatic, but unexplained disappearances of students over the decades. The disappearances always coincided with a major structural upgrade to the school. A new wing, a new foundation, or oddly the installation of the swimming pool. The high school wasn't just a place of education, it was the anchor point for a phenomenon. I traveled back to Minnesota. I couldn't resist the pull of the mystery, armed with the knowledge of what I had seen. I used the money from the settlement to buy a small, anonymous RV, my own private, mobile bunker. I parked miles outside of Tomskog, blending into the rural landscape. I needed to find Hank. If anyone knew the subtle, long-term changes, it would be the collector, the boy who cataloged the minute variations in the world. I visited the local historical society. I sifted through old town records, finding architectural blueprints for the high school. The plans confirmed the local legends. The high school was built on the site of an old, abandoned logging mill known for bizarre accidents and unexplained structural failures. The plans for the swimming pool were extensive, showing a massive, reinforced concrete shell that went far deeper than any standard municipal pool. It was labeled in the blueprint's margin, in an archaic script, as the basin. I theorized the swimming pool was not built for recreation. It was a containment vessel. The water, the chlorine, the immense concrete structure, it was all designed to hold something back, something that required constant chemical management and structural pressure. I began to track the whereabouts of the rest of the class of 2000. They weren't just transformed, they were displaced. They had scattered across the Midwest, seemingly normal, but they were pulled back to the facility for reasons tied to a schedule or a command structure. I found an old address for Roy Melonhead, the guy whose speech impediment reminded me of the gulping noise. I drove to his house late one night. It was a secluded farmhouse. I didn't approach, I simply watched. I saw Roy. He was standing in his backyard looking up at the moon. He was tall, grayish, and his facial features were still subtly exaggerated. He was still Melonhead, but now he was fully integrated into the world. He was still watching. And then I saw the pool. In the center of his overgrown backyard, a large, in-ground pool stood empty, covered with a tarp. It was green with stagnant water. And surrounding the pool, scattered across the grass, were dozens of meticulously sorted plastic pop tabs. He was still the collector. His habits had simply become tools of his new existence. I needed to make contact. I couldn't fight these things with a handgun. I needed knowledge. I needed to understand the hierarchy of the transformations. I drove back to the complex where I was kidnapped. It was gone, replaced by a generic warehouse structure, but the feeling of unnatural silence was still there. I knew they hadn't left, they had simply decentralized. My only living lead was Hank, the original collector. He was the most likely to understand the new system of organization because his old obsession was collecting, categorizing, and cataloging. I found Hank's plumbing business address in a neighboring state. I approached him during the day wearing my old work boots and a clean plaid shirt, blending in as a fellow contractor. Hank was older, thicker, and smelled of pipe cement and honest labor. But his eyes were unsettlingly bright. "Hank," I said, extending my hand. "Mark." Tom Skog High, class of 2000. Hank paused, his eyes narrowing. You weren't supposed to be here that long. I was there long enough. I remember your jars. I remember Melon Head. I remember the white van. Hank led me to a quiet corner of his shop. He didn't deny anything. He just looked profoundly weary. It started with the pool, Hank explained. The day the pool was finished at the high school, the feeling changed. We all felt it, the cold, the quiet. It wasn't a game. It was a transformation. He explained that the high school was built over a deep, geological anomaly that required constant hydrostabilization. The pool was a containment field. But the entity trapped beneath wasn't trying to escape. It was trying to assimilate. It reached out and offered us perfection, Hank whispered. It took away the messy parts of being a teenager, the acne, the anxiety, the self-doubt. In exchange, we became its maintenance crew. The class of 2000 wasn't kidnapped because they were targets. They were kidnapped because they were non-compliant workers. They had left the containment zone. The entity needs us to maintain the containment, Hank continued, tracing the grime on his workbench. But the containment is the memory of the class. The class of 2000 is the final perimeter. As long as we remember the rules of the containment, the anomaly stays localized under the pool. He revealed the horrifying truth about the transformations. The monstrous forms, Melon Head, the acid-melted man, were the result of flawed assimilation attempts. People who resisted the new order, their bodies becoming unstable conduits. Melon Head, I realized. His nickname was a cruel prophecy. He became the unstable sludge because he resisted. He was the first. He was the strongest. He wanted the strength without the sacrifice. The creature only gives you what you need, but what he needed was chaos. Hank pulled out a small glass jar, sealed tight. Inside were meticulously sorted copper pennies. This is my job now. To maintain order. To ensure the materials are sorted. The rules keep the world from noticing the chaos below. He confirmed the hierarchy. The Babin siblings were the enforcers. They handled the physical security because their forms had fully stabilized. The woman in the gray suit and the doctor were logistics. Hatchet Pharmaceuticals was just a corporate shell for the containment project. You were identified as a flaw, Hank said, pointing to the scar on my finger. You left before the final assimilation procedure. You are an unstable variable that carries the memory of the past. They didn't want to kill you, they wanted to quarantine your memory. And the acid burn on my finger? That was a test. A way to see if you would stabilize into a worker or if you would become an unstable creature like Melon Head. You didn't stabilize. You fought. I looked at the jar of pennies. I need to go back to the pool. I need to break the containment. I have to finish the job you were supposed to finish. No, Hank said, shaking his head. You don't break the containment. You decentralize the memory. If the memory isn't tied to the pool, the entity loses its core anchor. The class can finally be free. Hank gave me the ultimate weapon, a meticulously organized ledger containing the full names, current addresses, and digital footprints of every living member of the class of 2000. The list of the perimeter. The containment is the collective memory of the class, Hank whispered. You have to spread the memory of the anomaly into the world. Turn the core into 1,000 scattered points of chaos. Make the entity chase 1,000 ghosts, not one anchor. I left Hank's shop with the ledger, the list of names and addresses, and a profound sense of responsibility. I was no longer fleeing, I was an agent of chaos, tasked with dismantling a terrifying hidden containment system. The first step was to validate Hank's theory, the power of the centralized memory. I needed to create a massive, synchronized event that would overload the system's ability to maintain its core anchor. I realized the perfect tool, the Tom Skog High School Class of 2000 reunion. I spent the next 6 weeks using the old, unsecured network contacts Hank provided to organize a massive, unauthorized reunion. I created fake social media accounts, sent cryptic emails, and used the names in the ledger to bypass every digital security measure. I needed to bring the entire perimeter back to the anchor point. I scheduled the reunion for the abandoned school gymnasium, right next to the swimming pool, the basin. I knew the event would force the entity to draw all its attention and power back to the core. As the reunion date approached, the psychological pressure intensified. The voices of the transformed, the rolling RS of the Babin siblings, the constant affirmation of the logistics crew, began to bleed into my communication. I received cryptic texts on my old, unsecured phone. The perimeter is stable. Do not proceed. The containment is secure. You will be categorized. I ignored them. I knew the final confrontation had to be public, massive, and entirely focused on shattering the collective silence. I arrived at the school on the night of the reunion. The gym was dark. The air was cold, smelling faintly of chlorine and old sweat. I set up a large projector aimed at the far wall. The power was sporadic, but I had brought my own generator. The first bus arrived. It wasn't full of my former classmates. It was full of the transformed. Melonhead, the Babin siblings, and dozens of people I vaguely recognized from the high school. Their skin was gray, their movements fluid and unnatural. They were the physical manifestation of the containment, the security force. The transformed flowed out of the bus, silent and methodical. They weren't armed with guns. They were armed with order. They formed a massive, expanding circle around the gymnasium entrance. I stood alone in the center of the gym floor, my back to the pool doors. The Babin siblings stepped forward. The brother, Roy, with his rolling RS and swallowing tick, was the one who spoke. "The perimeter is secure. You will cease the gathering." "This is a reunion, Roy," I said, my voice echoing in the vast, empty gym. "The class of 2000 is finally getting back together. The rules are final. The class is contained." "The class is a lie," I corrected. "The containment is a lie. You are not Melonhead, Roy. You are a prisoner of a flawed system." I hit the switch. The projector roared to life, casting a massive image onto the far wall. It wasn't a school photo. It was a single perfect photograph of Hank's jars, the meticulously sorted bottle caps, pop tabs, and lost screws. The sight of the organized chaos, the beautiful human obsession with collection and order, hit the transformed like a physical blow. Their movements faltered. The organized perimeter broke. "The true perimeter is not the class," I shouted. "The true containment is unnecessary human order." The distraction was temporary. The transformation was too strong. They renewed their silent advance. I pulled out my ultimate weapon, prepared with Hank's help, a massive digitized yearbook of the class of 2000. I put the digital image on a continuous loop, projecting hundreds of faces onto the wall. I began reciting the names, not the transformed ones, but the original names. The names of the innocent students, the ones who had loved, laughed, and moved away carrying their memories far from the pool. The act of reciting the genuine, scattered memories created a psychic shockwave. The entity's core anchor, the collective memory of the class being contained, was dissolving. The transformed screamed, not with rage but with confusion. Their unified purpose broke as their individual, human memories of friendship and childhood chaos flooded back. Melonhead staggered, clutching his head, a single tear of acid running down his face. The containment was broken. The anchor was dissolved. I had won the final confrontation not by violence, but by memory retrieval. The final, chaotic moments of the confrontation were a symphony of human and non-human confusion. The transformed security personnel, the Babin siblings, Melonhead, and the others, were locked in a battle between the perfect, unified consciousness of the containment and the sudden, overwhelming flood of their own disorganized human past. They stumbled through the gym, fighting the phantom memories of awkward dances, broken friendships, and teenage angst. I watched as the unified perimeter completely dissolved. The beautiful, flawless order of the assimilated was destroyed by the glorious, inefficient mess of adolescence. I ran to the pool doors located near the gymnasium floor. The massive, reinforced steel doors were sealed tight. I knew the final threat wasn't the remaining security, but the entity itself, now unbound and free to manifest without the restraint of the perimeter. I heard the sound of the entity, a low, powerful thrumming that resonated through the concrete. It was rising from the basin, angry and immense. I grabbed the sledgehammer I had hidden beneath a pile of folding chairs. I had one final necessary act: to destroy the structural representation of the containment. The pool was the core anchor. I smashed the sledgehammer against the reinforced steel door of the pool entrance. The metal groaned but held. I slammed it again and again, channeling all my fear and rage into the blows. The transformed agents made a final attempt to stop me. They moved with desperate, fragmented purpose, their unified command structure broken. They were fighting me with individualized human tactics. A shove, a trip, a broken chair swung wildly. The system was failing and they were trying to save it. I hit the door one final time. The lock mechanism gave way with a screech of tortured metal. The doors buckled inward, revealing the immense, dark, and still water of the pool. The pool, the basin, was an immense, black void in the center of the gymnasium substructure. The lights reflecting off the surface were dull, the water impossibly deep. The thrumming sound was overwhelming now. The containment was breached. The entity was free. I stood on the edge of the pool, the sledgehammer heavy in my hands. The sight was terrifying. The perfect, still water was the manifestation of the contained anomaly. I didn't have to wait long. The surface of the water began to bubble, slowly at first, then violently. A column of dark, oily water erupted from the center of the pool, rising 20 feet into the air. At the center of the column, coalescing from the steam and spray, was the final manifestation of the entity. It wasn't a monster. It was a massive, fluid column of light and energy, constantly shifting shape, but focused on a single point, a central core that pulsed with the light of the facility's stolen knowledge. I looked at the water. I knew I couldn't fight it. I had to use the ultimate weapon of the class of 2000, the messy, glorious inefficiency of human creativity. I turned back to the gym floor. The entire class, the assimilated and the original invitees, were now watching, their faces reflecting the shifting light from the pool. I had brought one final piece of equipment, a small, portable sound system. I hit the play button. The sound that erupted was not a command, not a chant, not a confession. It was the unfinished symphony, a recording I had made of all the random, chaotic noise of the high school. The slamming lockers, the wrong notes from the band practice, the half-whispered secrets, the laughter, and the crying. A symphony of pure, beautiful human failure. The chaotic sound waves slammed into the entity. The column of water staggered. The light flickered. The entity, accustomed to the structured silence of containment, was overwhelmed by the raw, unpredictable noise of the human heart. The pool began to drain violently, sucked down by a massive, natural hydraulic force. The entity was pulled downward, collapsing inward on itself as its anchor point. The water was removed. I watched the light dim, the column of water shrink until the pool was dry. The basin was empty. The entity was gone. The silence returned, but this time, it was a silence of peace. The containment was broken, and the entity was gone, pulled back into the deepest subterranean vein, denied the anchor of the structured memory. The aftermath was chaos. The local police were called. My story was deemed the ravings of a traumatized man, but the physical evidence, the massive pool drained to its concrete floor, the broken gymnasium doors, was undeniable. Hatchet Pharmaceuticals, the corporate shell, vanished overnight. The class of 2000, now freed from the immediate psychic control, was left with a confusing residue of fragmented memories. Melonhead, the Babin siblings, they were still physically altered, but the core madness was gone. They were simply confused, traumatized people looking for answers. I made contact with Hank. He was still the collector, but his purpose had changed. He wasn't collecting for order. He was collecting evidence. He now meticulously cataloged the fragmented memories of his classmates, seeking patterns, seeking truth. He had become the chronicler of the chaos. My mission was clear. I had to protect the story. I had to ensure the containment remained permanent. I realized the ultimate lesson of the class of 2000. The best defense against profound, supernatural order is the sustained, organized chaos of a shared narrative. I started a private, encrypted digital forum. I brought together the survivors, the former members of the class of 2000, Hank, and the few others who had witnessed the full scope of the incident. We began sharing our memories, our dreams, our fragmented experiences. The forum was a success. We were writing the ultimate necessary work of fiction, the collaborative chaos memoir. The final piece of the puzzle was the most personal. I knew the entity was gone, but the memory of its pursuit, the sheer terror of being hunted by my former friends, still lingered. I realized the ultimate act of defiance wasn't just defeating the entity, it was reclaiming the simple joy of my life. I quit my repair business. I sold the assets. I took my wife and kids on a massive, nonsensical road trip, deliberately driving through random, chaotic cities, embracing the unpredictable noise of civilization. The psychological scars remained, but they were now badges of honor. I still checked the corner of my eye for Melonhead's lurching walk, but I counter it with the knowledge of Hank's collecting obsession and the laughter of my own children. I realized my true profession wasn't veterinary science or repair. It was storytelling. I was the custodian of the chaos, the one who kept the narrative alive, the one who ensured the silence would never return. And every year, on the anniversary of the pool draining, the collaborative chaos memoir grows longer, messier, and more contradictory. The stories evolve, the details shift, and the collective memory of the class of 2000 becomes a profound, beautiful work of human inefficiency. The entity is still there, deep beneath the earth, waiting for the silence. But it will never find it. Not as long as the class of 2000 keeps talking, keeps remembering, and keeps writing the glorious, chaotic truth.